and our cameraman is Carman, and we're interviewing Major Paul F. Fitzpatrick from the Vietnam War on November 24th, 2003. Hi, Mr. Fitzpatrick.
How are you?
Could you tell us your full name?
Paul Fitzpatrick.
When and where were you born?
I was born in November 6, 1948 in Worcester, Massachusetts.
What was your prior education to enter in the service?
Before I entered the service, I had finished high school and had finished a 4-year degree in education as an elementary education teacher at Westfield State College in Massachusetts. Graduated in 1970.
All right. Did you have an occupation prior to entering the service?
No real occupation, just some odd jobs I did in high school and in college. Like I worked at From the Ice Cream. I worked as a grocery store bagger and cashier, those kinds of things. I had worked a couple of summers. One summer I worked in an M16 factory as an inspector.
How was that?
It was interesting. I wanted to be one of the ones that got to do the testing, but they had more experienced people doing that. But it was an interesting job.
Mm-hmm.
But as factory work, it was kind of monotonous.
Yeah. When did you enter the service?
I entered the service in December of 1970, about five months after graduating from college, or 6 months after graduating from college, and 5 months after getting married.
Were you drafted or enlisted?
It's interesting. There was at that time a draft, and there had been a draft deferment for teachers. And as soon as I had gotten certified as a teacher and done several interviews for teaching positions, President Nixon ordered that the deferment for teachers be lifted. So the deferment was gone. My draft number was a low number, 76, and I had a draft notice. And to prevent from being drafted and being on the ground in the swamps, I decided to join the Air Force instead.
What was your wife's reaction?
She knew all along, I think, from before we got married, what was happening. We had hoped that I could get a teaching job because she was already teaching in her hometown. But it was pretty evident that it wasn't going to happen, so she took it in stride.
What did you know about Vietnam prior to the service?
Well, by the time I got in the service, it was 1970, and the war had been going on for quite a while. So we were all pretty well aware. That was the age of all the protests and the campus demonstrations, and the campus I was on was no different. There were a number of demonstrations, which I did not take part in. But we were pretty knowledgeable. It was on the news all of the time. And there was the group of people that thought it was all wrong, and those of us who held out thinking that our government must be right or we wouldn't be doing such a thing. Mm-hmm. So who knew that we were on the wrong side of that issue? But we knew what it was about. We knew that people our age were being killed, and we kind of accepted it as the patriotic thing to do. At least many of us did.
Yeah. Were you afraid?
Not really, because the job that I had after being commissioned as an officer and going through the officer training and going through navigator training, the plane I was flying was a KC-135, which was refueling, usually at high altitude or fairly high altitude, and the chances of me being actually involved in any real combat or real fighting was pretty remote. So only the normal fear you'd have of going away from home for a certain amount of time, and it was a war zone. So there's a certain amount of, I won't say fear, but caution and reality.
Yeah. Where did you go for basic training?
Basic training or officer training that I went through was at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. I was at the officer training school.
And what were you specifically trained for?
Specifically trained, the first thing you always train for is military courtesy and bearing, and right off the bat they told, we're being trained to be officers, so we had to be on both sides of that issue, being able to give respect but also to receive the respect due to an officer. So it was kind of a two-edged thing there. And we were what they called it back, I think this phrase came from World War II, 90-day wonders. I don't know if you've heard that expression before. And basically the training was 90 days. It was a 3-month training program. We went from being civilian college kids to being second lieutenants in the Air Force in 90 days. Pretty amazing.
Yeah. Did you develop any relationships during your training?
None that have really lasted from that training. There were a few people that I met later on that were in my flight and my squad in training that I came across later on. But after that training, you pretty well disperse to different schools and different classes, and some people went to pilot training, and some people went to logistics training, and some people went to navigator training. And then from there, we might be in different classes in different sections. So it was really difficult to keep in touch with those guys. So I have followed up on a few of them.
Yeah. When were you sent overseas?
I was sent overseas after my navigator training. My first assignment in the KC-135 was to Loring Air Force Base, Maine, and it was in the end of 1970. Let's see, it would have been the end of 1971. No, I'm sorry, 1972, when my crew was notified that we were going over. We went over one crew at a time. Each base had a certain number of crews and airplanes they had to send over at any one time, and it was on a rotation. And we were over there only for 3-month rotations. And mine came, we actually left for Southeast Asia on Christmas morning of 1972.
How did that go?
That was pretty strange. By that time I had one child, and we had celebrated Christmas the week before, knowing that I was leaving on Christmas morning. And my father-in-law drove up from Massachusetts and picked up my wife and baby daughter on Christmas Eve, on the day before Christmas, and drove away with them so that they wouldn't be there when I left. So it was kind of strange, kind of weird.
Were you sent directly to Vietnam?
I never went really to Vietnam. I went to with a stopover in Guam, and then in Thailand. I was stationed at a base called Utapao. That's Utapao, Utapao, Thailand. It's on the southwest coast of Thailand, and we flew our missions over Cambodia and Vietnam and over the Gulf of Tonkin.
What were your general skills and duties?
As a navigator, it was my job basically to keep the airplane properly positioned in the right orbit, get it to where we're going. By an orbit, what I mean is that we would fly in a large straight leg pattern for probably about 5 minutes, and then we do a complete 180 turn around, fly a straight leg pattern back for the same amount of time, and then turn around and keep flying the same orbit indefinitely. And the receiver aircraft, usually fighters, F-4s usually, would know where we were. We were assigned to be in a certain orbit that had a name and a number to it, and they would refuel us from that position. So they knew where to get their gas. They usually would be directed from some ground controller as to how to get to us and where we were.
Can you describe the KC-135?
KC-135 is the military equivalent of a Boeing 720, which is a little smaller than a 707. It was really interesting. The airplane was designed first as a tanker and later as an airliner. So when we talk about the 707 being the first jet airliner, it actually was designed first as a tanker for the military and then converted. So it's 4 engines, Pratt & Whitney J57 engines. Usually the weight of the airplane empty was just under 100,000 pounds. The weight of the airplane full was almost 300,000 pounds. So when we took off at our full weight, 2/3 of our total weight were fuel. And we could offload or use any of that gas. So we could use all 200,000 pounds, or about 180,000 pounds of fuel ourselves, or we could offload it using the boom into receiver airplanes.
Did it have any gunnery on it in case of gunnery?
No gunnery. The only guns we carried in the airplane were over the combat zone. Each of the crew members had a snub-nosed .38 Police Special. Usually not loaded. We didn't like guns.
How necessary do you think the air refuelers were?
It was absolutely essential. The entire fighter aspect of the war couldn't have taken place at all without the air refueling. B-52s normally they would fly in from Guam someplace and drop their bombs without refueling. But any of the fighter activity, in order for any kind of a fighter airplane, an F-4, an F-105, A-7s, and others, in order for them to do their job and put ordnance on a target, they had to have refueling.
Mm-hmm.
And if they went to a target and didn't use up all their ordnance, they come back up and get some gas and hang around with us for a while until another target came around. And we give them some gas and down they went again.
Did you help attach the pipe to the other plane?
No, that was the job of the only enlisted man on the crew, was a boom operator. And his job was to lay on his stomach and the belly of the airplane near their tail, and there was what we call the boom pod, which is like a little bubble down at the bottom of the plane with it had windows in it, and he laid in his stomach on a mat, and he controlled flying the boom, directing the boom up, down, left, and right himself with some controls. And the job of the receiver aircraft was to get up underneath in a certain location so that the boom operator could make contact.
Mm-hmm.
And that was quite a skill also. I participated in that a few times,
Yeah.
but that wasn't my job.
How fast were both of you moving while?
Usually, probably 350 knots, which is a little over 400 miles an hour.
Wow.
So it's at 21,000 feet, 400 miles an hour, and it's an everyday occurrence. It still goes on hundreds of times every day, day and night, all the time, and almost never with an accident. Every once in a while, an incident will be some damage, but I don't recall anyone ever being killed in a refueling accident.
That's good. Was it hard to remain stable?
In turbulence it was. In good weather it was pretty easy. You didn't even know what was happening. You'd feel a little jolt when the contact was made. You could hear a little thump noise, and then you'd hear the pumps operating as the fuel was being pumped into the receiver aircraft. And that was it. Other than that, you wouldn't even know what was going on, unless you went to the back and looked up about it.
Mm-hmm. How many planes were you able to refuel off of one takeoff?
It depends. If it was in the fighters, we could have numerous receivers. We had 180,000 pounds of fuel, and they might take 6,000 to 10,000 pounds at a time, which for us was nothing, but for them it was enough to do what they needed to do. So we could do 20 or 30 receivers some nights.
Oh, wow.
And sometimes they just needed a small top off, 2,000 or 3,000 pounds.
Was there other air refuelers in there?
Yeah, usually there'd be a number of us in the same orbit, and the ground controllers would direct the fighters to us. We usually didn't have to go get them. Every once in a while there'd be somebody in trouble, and we'd have to go get them.
Mm-hmm.
That's when it got exciting, because that's when I had to do my job and direct the airplane to the receiver using some electronic devices where we could see him on my radar screen, and I'd direct the rendezvous from there. But most often it was in the war zone, it was done by ground controllers. So I was really, I won't say useless, but my job was not as important as it would be in other cases.
Mm-hmm. Were you constantly refueling planes?
No, most of the time we were just waiting. Sometimes we'd go up and we'd spend 6 hours in an orbit and not see anybody. Nobody would come.
How was that like?
Boring. Very boring. They say that flying is hours and hours of boredom interspersed with moments of sheer terror. So we had hours and hours of sheer boredom, which was sometimes better than the terror, but
yeah.
At least the terror was exciting.
Was it silent on the plane, or did you guys?
No, we could chat. We had an intercom system, which was not a radio, not putting out to anybody, so we could talk on that. And we'd point things out, or if we saw something, or if we heard something. And sometimes it would just be idle chatter, but not that much.
How many combat missions did you serve in?
I had 33 combat missions.
Was there a required amount?
No, the way we worked, it was called the Young Tiger Tanker Task Force. Like that, I would say that fast 3 times. The Young Tiger Tanker Task Force, and from all of bases all over the United States would send, as I said earlier, a certain number of crews would be required to be there at a time. You'd serve 3 months, and then you'd rotate home, and you'd be replaced by someone else from your base.
Mm-hmm.
So 3 months. I only had one tour because we didn't start until December of '72. By the end of January, the war was over. So we really only served in the war zone for a little over a month, and then everything was winding down, and we were kind of a stage of waiting to see if the truce would hold, or if we'd really be going home, or what would happen to the POWs, would they be released, and all of that kind of stuff. So we were just waiting and seeing from that point. So I was there right at the end of the war.
Yeah. Where did most of your combat missions take place?
Mostly over South Vietnam, or sometimes up near the DMZ or near the border of North Vietnam, and one or two out over the Gulf of Tonkin, right at the border near Da Nang. Those were probably I would say this, I won't say the scariest, but the most intense, because we were so close to North Vietnamese territory and out over the water.
Mm-hmm. Did you receive any injuries?
No injuries, no, except from eating Thai food. That was not very good, but that's not an injury, that's more of an illness, which was also pretty common.
Did you spend a lot of time on the ground in Thailand?
Some time on the ground. We got to do a long weekend of R&R, which is rest and relaxation or recuperation, and not that we needed it at the time. We had only been there a couple of weeks. And we went to a resort area on the coast, which was, you might think it was no war at all going on. And most of the people that frequent that particular area were either German or Australian, so their countries weren't involved in the war. So it was almost like there was no war. The United States military actually had a complex there that was owned by them, mm-hmm. Which was set aside for crews doing relaxation.
Were you eager to participate in your missions?
Oh yeah, I think that most of us were much happier to be flying than sitting and waiting. It was, we would scramble to get the missions. Sometimes if there was, they needed crews to do something, everyone would volunteer, because it was better than sitting down. Besides that, we thought we were doing something that was well worthwhile. And even if you didn't believe 100% in the war effort, you still believed that the guys that you needed the gas. Mm-hmm. And you were there to help them out and do the best job you could.
When did the Mercy Medical Mission take place?
I'm not sure what you're talking about.
It was the one where you saved that one person?
Oh, that took place, that was well after the war in Vietnam. That was probably in 1974 or 1975, and that was at Loring Air Force Base. And we had a gunshot wound that happened on a late Friday afternoon, and they were calling people to find out, because Friday afternoon on an Air Force base, mostly people are, after they finished work or finished their missions, have gone to the bar, and they were trying to find a group of people who hadn't been to the bar, and I answered the phone and I hadn't, and so they called me in, and it was kind of a makeshift group of guys that didn't normally fly together. They had to get this person down to Washington, to the trauma center in Washington, as quickly as possible. We didn't have a trauma center anywhere near where we were in Loring Air Force Base, Maine, and so they put this person on the airplane, and we went direct. It was my job there to plot a direct route from where we were to where we were going. So I was very busy on that mission, mm-hmm. Plotting the route and getting us there as quickly as possible. And unfortunately, we were unsuccessful, and the person died. But we did the best we could.
Was there any close calls while refueling?
Not while refueling. I think we have anyone who's flown at all for any length of time has had those times when you've felt the close call. When you finished and you landed, and you said, "Wow, that was interesting," or "That was close." Usually not a frightening thing, because you're too busy to be frightened, because you have too many things to do. And most of those took place either on takeoff or on landing. Mm-hmm. Right here at Griffiths, back in 1982 or 83, when I was flying out of Griffiths, and we had a very heavy fuel load. We were using water injection, which gives us augmented thrust, and to get the fuel load off the ground. And we were having a mission where we were going to be meeting some airplanes. I'm not sure what airplanes they were, I can't recall exactly, returning from Europe. And we were going to meet them halfway across the Atlantic Ocean. Other refuelers would take them halfway across, and we would meet them and escort them all the way back and refuel them all the way back. And on takeoff, we ingested a couple of birds into the extreme left-hand engine, the number 4 engine, which immediately caused a fire light and put us out of commission. And on the takeoff, that heavy, losing an engine on takeoff was quite interesting. It was quite interesting, and we ended up orbiting, burning off, and then dumping fuel and coming back to land. And when we saw the engine when we landed, it was pretty bad shape. Sometimes you get a fire light and you don't really have a fire. We had a fire. So that was kind of interesting. And another one on landing one day when we were just down. We were very, very low on gas, had barely enough gas to get to an emergency or an alternate airfield. And this was while I was stationed at Loring. And when we got to our minimum altitude, you get down so low, and it gets dangerous if you get any lower and you can't see the runway. We could just barely make out the lights, and the pilot said we had to go for it. So we went for it, and when we broke through the clouds, we were really low and not really lined up. And that was also very interesting. So everyone who's flown has had their share of interesting ones.
What was your day-to-day life like
during the war period or during the normal?
During the war.
During the war period, day-to-day, depended if we were at a flying mission or not. Normally, if we were flying, then it was preparing for the mission, whether it was day or night, making sure you had enough rest, make sure that you'd eaten enough, and of the right kinds of food, because you don't want to get up there and have a problem. So that if it was a flight day, then you'd be preparing for the flight. You wouldn't really do anything strenuous that day. If it was a non-flight day, there were things with the USO. I remember spending hours doing jigsaw puzzles and that kind of stuff, looking through, doing a lot of reading, looking through different catalogs and stuff, because you could get good things cheaper over there, like China and things. I bought toys and stuff for my daughter and things like that. So that kind of stuff. And if we knew we were off for a few days, we might take a short trip.
Were most of your days flight missions?
About half of flight missions. I had 33 classified combat missions in just over 40 days. So a little more than half were flight missions. After the hostilities ended, it got really slow, and we would only do training missions. And in those cases, we'd actually refuel B-52s just to keep everybody's proficiency up. And they were classified as training missions.
Were they during the day or?
Mostly during the day.
Did you have any night ones?
A lot of night, and the combat missions were often at night.
Were those hard?
It's not really any harder to do it at night than it is in the day. You can't see as well, but there are lights, and everyone is so well trained in what their job is that it's. I won't say it's second nature, but you're confident.
Yeah.
Not overconfident, but confident, and it's not really any more difficult because of the training you get.
What experiences left the great impressions on you?
In the wartime, I think the greatest impression I had was the way the men acted. The men acted, and even the B-52 people that we knew that were going up and were getting shot at and were getting shot down, we still associated with them. They flew out of the same base we did. But it was a matter of, the confidence in their training that they had, the knowledge that if they got shot down, that they had the training to protect themselves, to evade. We all had the kind of training that you would get for POW training, resistance training, and what to do if captured. And I think we were all confident in that we could go out and do our job, not afraid, not really afraid, but with the healthy respect, I think, for what we're doing and for what we might be called upon to do. But I didn't really see any fear. There was some concern.
Did you receive any decorations, medals, or commendations?
Well, everybody that was over there got the Vietnam Service Medal. We got Distinguished DSM, or the Distinguished Service Medal, and the I'm trying to think of the name of it. I had it up just the other day, and I can't remember what it was. But there were a number of different medals, not necessarily for heroism or bravery, but for simply doing things, being there at the right time, mostly for doing your job. They give you medals for doing your job. Who knew?
Did you feel the war was successful?
I think the war was successful in some areas. It showed us that from the vantage point of back home, and when you're over there, the last thing you want to think about is the protesters and all that stuff. I think it did a lot of negative stuff to morale and everything else. But in the end, they were right. The people who protested were right. The government had pulled a fast one. The goals weren't achievable. It was not a war that could be won the way we were trying to fight it. And I think that the protesters in the end turned out to be the people who had the better insight as to what was going on. Perhaps it was good to bring the United States down a little bit from our arrogance, which we tend to show sometimes, which I think we're tending to show again with the issue with Iraq. And sometimes you need to be taken back down to reality. The worst thing of me is the treatment that the veterans of Vietnam have always gotten. There were no parades, there were no congratulations. They were just, one of the first things you would do when you get home is you take the uniform off.
Oh, really?
You take the uniform off because you didn't want to be seen in public in the uniform, because it was a matter of, especially later in the war. Early in the war, 64, 65, maybe even 66, yes. By 68, 69, 70, when people were off base, they didn't wear uniforms. And when they got home off the plane, not necessarily us, because we went from a base to a base, but the normal soldiers who flew into certain places, you didn't want to be seen as a soldier. You could still be told by your short hair, because long hair was in style then, and the short hair was a dead giveaway. But people could tell you were in the military, and sometimes you get yelled at, you'd be cursed at, you'd be spit at, you'd have things thrown at you. It was not a homecoming deserving of any American soldier.
Wow.
And even to this day, if you see a Vietnam vet, someone say welcome home, because they didn't get that welcome home when they came home.
All right. Did you remain overseas after the war ended?
We stayed until March. The war ended in late January. We stayed there till March doing training missions. Then it was 3 months was up and we rotated out. But others came to take our place, still waiting because we weren't sure how long it was going to stop. About a year later, I was involved in a mission where we flew out of Hawaii, in which they were finally bringing a lot of the airplanes back that were over there, a lot of the F-4s and stuff, and they needed to be refueled for their flight back. Mm-hmm. I was involved in a pretty large operation returning F-4 airplanes back to the United States.
When were you discharged?
I finally left the Air Force in 1985, after 14 years, just because it was time to go.
Mm-hmm. How did the war affect you?
I have to say the war probably affected me in a positive way, as far as my own personal confidence and my own abilities and these kind of things. I was an extremely shy and reserved person before that, and I think it helped to change me, and probably not a great way, because I didn't see any combat really firsthand. I wasn't there on the ground, but I did see things and hear things and met a lot of brave people, and that does change you to take part in something like that.
Mm-hmm. What was your employment after the service? After
the service, I substituted in Rome City School District, and in the following fall, 1985, got a permanent job and started teaching at Stroud Junior High.
Did you come to Rome because of Griffiths?
We came to Rome because of Griffiths. That's how I got here. Yeah, we're originally from Massachusetts. Came because of the base being here, and decided to stay. It's a good place to be.
Yeah. Was your wife already here?
No, my wife was also from Massachusetts and came with us. And we already had both of our children when we got here. Mm-hmm. So they started in, my oldest daughter started 2nd grade here, and my youngest daughter started kindergarten here, and they're both adults now.
All right.
I had a question. After Vietnam, what was your role in the Air Force after that?
In the Air Force, that was during the Cold War, so our primary role as tanker crew members was participating in the Cold War, which was the war between the United States and the Soviet Union and their Soviet Union's allies in the Warsaw Pact. So we had basically a nuclear deterrent mission, which our primary job was to train for, and if need be, to fly refuel B-52s in a nuclear strike mission against the Soviet Union.
Were you stationed over here, or were you
I was stationed here, yeah, all of that was here, starting in Loring Air Force Base in Maine, and then I spent 4 years at the Navigator Training School at Mayfair Air Force Base in California, and then another 3.5 years here. I also spent some time in Turkey as a munitions maintenance officer, and I spent some time here as an aircraft maintenance officer.
Thank you, Mr. Fitzpatrick.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you.
Excellent.
That was fun.
I had a good time.
Good questions.
I have a question.